Hi, everyone, and welcome to our virtual panel on virtualizing security training. We're glad if you're able to make it, and hope if you don't make it, you'll be able to see this later on. My name's Hugh Burley. I'm the Director of Information Security at Thompson Rivers University, located in the interior of British Columbia. We're a medium-sized school with about 2,200 staff and faculty and 27,000 students, almost all of them virtual now. Just a couple of ideas for you before we get started. Could you please type your questions into the chat, and we will try to address the questions at 40 minutes after the hour. We'll give about 10 minutes. We would like to wrap this up 10 minutes before the top of the hour to give everyone a break from virtualized meetings. Our panelists today are Namir Anani. He is the Chief Executive Officer at Starship, or at ICTC, Information and Communications Technology Council. We have Tushar Singh, Chief Executive Officer at StarshipDreams.com. And we have Heather MacLean, Executive Director at EC Council. And I'd just like to allow our panelists to all introduce themselves and tell us a bit about their company and about their virtualized security training programs. So I'll start with Namir.
Yeah, thank you, Hugh, for the introduction. So we are a national center of expertise for the digital economy with the aim of advancing Canada's digital advantage in a global context. We do a lot of technology research to trying to figure out where the world is going and then the impact on the economy, the markets, and the labor aspects as well as developing policies. But our main focus as well, part of our main aspect of development is talent and capacity development for organizations in Canada. And we reach out to several thousands across the country from the industry, academic institutions, and policymakers. One of the largest, and we are across the country nationally, and one of the critical components that we do on the cyber security, apart from the research agenda that we manage, is a program that we call Cyber Titan. It's basically a national competition across the country, culminating in the month of May and sometimes in June, with over 200 organizations or schools coming together for high school students to get into, to attract them into careers into cybersecurity. And this program, we developed it modeled against or on the program by Cyber Patriots, the U.S. Air Force in the United States, and it's been a very successful program. I'll stop here and allow others to expand on their programs, and happy to dialogue on some of the issues here.
Great. Tushar, would you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, I'm Tushar Singh. I'm the CEO of Starship Dreams, as well as the CEO of Minute School. It's interrelated companies. Minute School also has a Luminate platform, which we use to essentially train in corporate environments and provide rapid on-demand training and customized and semi-customized training for cybersecurity, as well as developer secure coding practices, et cetera. We've been especially involved in this area with fintech companies, as well as companies in the United States, with helping their essentially development programmers, et cetera, go to the next level, especially with how the industry is rapidly changing away from having to train people and more through automated solutions. So how do you integrate and utilize those? And also, how do you understand what the AI solutions on the market actually are? So we're typically trying to stay ahead of the curve in what we're providing, and then providing our standard training platforms to those that are looking for more of the standard virtualized training as well.
Thanks, Tushar. And last but not least, Heather.
Hi, I'm Heather MacLean, and I'm with EC Council Canada. I'm the Executive Director, and we are the largest, fastest growing cybersecurity education, training, and certification body in the world. In fact, we have more than 20 different certifications, plus cybersecurity awareness training and on-demand learning for cybersecurity as well. And we have more than 250,000 members globally, and we continue to grow. And tonight I have a couple offers for everyone participating. For those that are looking to advance their CISO career and perhaps seek certification, we have our CISO certification that I'm offering up at a discounted price. You should be able to see email below saying canada@ecouncil.org. You can email us there to get your code for a discount of 15% off. As well, for all attendees at this year's CISO Forum, we're offering a free subscription to our CISO Mag, which is approximately $200 US. And you can use the code that you see on the site right now, and just go to the CISO Mag website and enter that under the subscribe section, or you can email us at canada@ecouncil.org for that code as well.
Great, thanks, Heather. So before we get too far into this discussion, I really wanted to tease out what's involved in virtualized training. What are the components? I know that one of the main components, of course, is online delivery. Every university has been forced into doing that with the pandemic. We've taken essentially face-to-face programs, and we have inserted BlueJeans or Zoom or WebEx or a variety of other online tools to allow our students to continue to attend those classes. But what are those other components of virtualized training that we should be seeing?
Maybe I'm happy to sort of add on this issue. First of all, I think we're all recognizing the benefits of online learning at the moment, specifically with the working from home. You know, the way we transact with our economy as much as with learning has changed dramatically in the last number of months. And there's no different in this environment. What we see from all of our analysis, but also from the platforms that we deliver on, where we work on, is that beyond the technical skills, and specifically in the cyberspace, is that there is a need for more collaborative communication, critical thinking, all of these aspects, problem solving. If you're doing any specific digital forensics, that you have to have some of these softer skills to help you achieve that. But what the new environment, or the online environment, I'm sure others will expand on as well, is that it offers much more capabilities in terms of online tutoring, peer-to-peer review from around the world, that this could happen, collaborative environment to exchange, which wasn't the case in the last number of years. And obviously a classroom environment by itself, although it's limited to the class, it doesn't give you that potential to expand much larger in terms of engaging other players in the analysis.
And if I could add to that, I think too, we talk a lot about the technology when we're talking about virtualized training, but I think we have to also think about the students themselves and how adults learn. And so we need to factor in the different modalities really that we're using for online learning. So things like on-demand, self-paced, or instructor-led. As adults, we learn differently. We have different expectations. So we have to be able to have those different modalities available. And ultimately, I think it's about people making the commitment and the time to set the time aside for whatever it is, if it's self-paced or if it's on demand, and having uninterrupted time to be able to do that. So I think that's part of what we need to be thinking about.
I agree. That uninterrupted time is really the challenge for me. I sit in a senior role, and really, I don't get those days that I can just set aside and dig into a virtualized training session. I need something discrete and clean, and that addresses often a very specific need that I might have at that time. Tushar, any additional comments on virtual training?
Absolutely. And I think the point you brought up about discrete training elements is one of the areas we focused starting about 10 years ago on recognizing that, especially in higher education, people don't have time, especially now that they're going to be trying to consume things mostly on mobile devices. And that really started a conversation for us about 4 years ago on how do you virtualize training and how do you actually make it effective. We're seeing right now that there's been a big push to virtualize training, but it's actually been pretty cheap. because you've seen budget crunches. You know, organizations have had limitation in funding, universities and colleges have had limitations. So the move has been primarily to essentially patch it with Zoom, which is a poor substitute for rich interactions, which Namir and Heather have both mentioned. And I think we've all spoken about is you really need to look at your program design and not looking at this from a one-off, we just need to kind of solve this and do it with Zoom and that'll work. You're not going to get the same results because people can really zone out on Zoom. You have to look at a fundamental design of your online program, of what your interactions will be, what's the methods you're going to prompt people and drive them forward in these discrete elements. So virtualizing training right now, there's a lot of companies out there that have been working on it, but they to really get to a point of a great result, you do need to almost gamify your experiences. You do need to have interactions, substantial interactions, and Namir mentioned this as well with what they're doing with the program that's modeled after the one in the US, is it's about engaging learners through different ways. And that isn't videos, it's exercises. And fundamentally in learning, you want to have that prompt. You want to teach potentially or allow consumption, but then prompts to actually ensure that they've absorbed it. So I think if you're looking at virtualized training now, you have to start at the fundamentals of this is a significantly different program you're designing that will have expenses and costs, because if you don't, you're going to have pretty poor outcomes.
Yeah, I really empathize with the idea of being able to concentrate for extended periods in a virtual environment. One of the biggest problems I have personally, and I do have to maintain some training in my own life, is after an hour of online training, my concentration has dropped to almost nothing. I really have to shut it off, get up, walk around. What's going on there? Do we need to have shorter pieces of training information? Does it have to be a certain size or length, or does it have to have a certain amount of engagement to keep people actually going?
I think Tushar mentioned it, in fact, eloquently. It's a gamification aspect. I think we need to enhance that attention capability and prolong that period more and more in an online environment. Gamification play a bigger component of this, the dialogue, rationalization with other members, whether it's peer review, online tutoring, and others. It can't be just programming that, listen to specific on-demand video or something is happening or a simple interaction. It has to be something specific to a case that you're developing in a project-based environment that will help you learn the new skills going forward.
I would agree with that. I neglected to mention I'm also a part-time professor, and I usually teach a once a week 3-hour course. Well, in this environment, I'm not teaching it that way. I've had to chunk it out and break it into, and I'm teaching asynchronously too, because my students are around the world. They're not necessarily here in my city right now. So it's breaking things out, chunking it out, and creating environments really where they can engage and finding ways for them to engage with other students and gamifying things. Because if I don't, I know I'm not getting the engagement. It's not the same thing.
So have you mentioned asynchronous training, and could you just give a small explanation for those of us who maybe aren't involved in the academic world?
Yeah, absolutely. So essentially, it's for anyone. Asynchronous training is whenever you can deliver the training, and so people consume it in their own time, and they don't have to be all together at one time. So, for example, I have a student in Vietnam, I have one in Colombia, I have a multitude here in New Brunswick, and they can consume it in their own time.
Great, thank you. So I want to switch gears a little bit now. We sort of briefly covered off the components of virtualized training and what we need to make it engaging and keep people's attention during these sessions. But in recent years, and of course much more now, we're seeing a rapid adoption of digital tools across Canada and BC, especially because we have loosened our privacy legislation to allow more use of cloud services. So thinking about that, what do you see as the necessary levers to enable cyber resiliency and sustainability or sustainable economic growth for Canada in the coming years? And you'll forgive me if I read that one off my other monitor.
Yeah, I'm maybe happy to expand on that, Hugh. I think you're absolutely right. I think with the recent adoption that we've seen in the last number of months, more than we have in the last potentially 5 years, and there's a lot of evidence on this. Specifically, as I mentioned earlier, with the working from home environment and the way that we transact with the economy pushed many of the companies to try to adopt cloud businesses, digital banking, and others. And obviously, it creates more of the vulnerabilities, or the cyber vulnerabilities in that environment. But I see at a national level, there are potentially three pillars that we have to look into to develop to make sure that we're creating the safeguards in the future. One is the development of the talent, whether it's reskilling and upskilling. This is a continuous phase. We can't just assume that the world is not going to change every day, every week. This environment evolves quite rapidly. So we have to continue that. And specifically for helping the companies, the small and medium and micro, to be able to develop the talent going forward. The second is the business readiness. I think many of the companies are not aware of the cyber threats they have. And they always say that you only realize that you have a cyber risk or a cyber attack only potentially a couple of months or a year after it has happened to you. So obviously, how do you create this proactive environment and get them to understand this? We have to develop the tools to help the capacity building for these organizations to understand that they are either on the golden standard or they're at the bottom of the ladder, and there's more to be done on that. Third is really, how do we deal with the essential skills? You and I, whether as consumers or as Canadians, whether we interact with, apply for a passport or do digital banking, we have to have some of those skills to be able to decipher what is right and what is wrong. And that will help create the collective environment, the skills development, the cyber business awareness, and the essential skills will create that holistic safeguards that we require as a country going forward. And there's a lot of discussions on that space, but I'll leave it to others to expand on.
And I would echo that. I think that, for cyber hygiene, we don't do enough there for the average person. When kids are growing up, we teach them how to cross the street, we teach them how to be safe, but we're not doing enough to teach children and adults and seniors how to be safe online. We're now the most phished country in the world. The risks are going up all the time, and as we become more digital, they're only going to increase. So for the protection of our critical infrastructure, for our society in general, we should be focusing a lot more on arming and preparing people for what they're doing online. And I think that's one of the biggest things that we have to look at. And then from there, we, as Namir said, we have to continue to upskill and reskill. Society keeps changing, our business keeps changing, new things emerge, and so the upskilling and reskilling is very important. ICTC did a study back in 2017 that looked at by 2023, 100,000 cybersecurity professionals would be in demand. And I would think now with COVID, that number's probably even increased. So it's a continual thing that we have to be focused on as a nation.
I'm going to add a little bit to that, and I'm going to focus more on Namir's, where he said the comment of training the future. I think we have to create a more permissive environment for students in high school and university and even beyond to be able to experiment in a white hat or gray hat manner with computer systems, an environment where they can actually learn how these systems work, pair them as well with those who understand human psychology, or at least learn that in higher education, so they can actually understand perhaps how to prevent certain attacks and understand trends that are coming in at the bleeding edge. Right now, there's far too few people working on that component, because the future that I see is one where it pairs artificial intelligence along with the experts in order to act in a proactive manner, or even a very quick reactive manner as soon as threats are perceived. We're seeing a lot of growth in that side of the industry. Arctic Wolf, a local company here in Waterloo, recently became a unicorn based on the products that they provide in market that are heavily based on automation, not necessarily saying fully AI, but automation. That is a massive trend. And you need experts who understand network technology, you understand how people behave in order to do that. And then you'll create the environment as well where you'll have those entrepreneurs thrive and potentially be able to serve not only Canada, but the global market, because that's another big belief I have, is that as a smaller country next to a giant of the US and EU, and then also China, we have to have an entrepreneurship mindset in order to be able to sell to those particular areas.
Yeah, and
I wholeheartedly agree.
Oh.
Go ahead.
I was gonna, just one more piece. Thank you, Namir. I think along with that and being more entrepreneurial in spirit, we also have to then think about more about what Namir was saying earlier about the small and medium and micro businesses. Many don't know the laws around privacy and around security. So as we add more complexities to it, we're going to have to do more to inform and educate those businesses as well.
So I'm one of those consumers, talented people. Sorry, Tushar, go ahead.
I just had one comment. I think there's a big piece to address on those small and medium businesses is the expense that typically the legacy security market has with certifications of technologies, et cetera, that make it so prohibitive. So if that's just kind of like a comment, is that we have to figure out how to make this less expensive to be secure. And that's a difficult problem to solve. And if anyone's listening in, you can make a lot of money by making people secure for a lot less. Namir, do you have any thoughts on that part?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. And New Brunswick was looking at some essential skills for businesses, basically modeled against a system in the UK. I'll give you an example. I was in Luxembourg speaking at a conference a number of years ago. And when I spoke to the government there, it was interesting to see that for any company that comes in, whether it's a fintech or something and establishes in Luxembourg, they have to go through a minimum standard of cybersecurity. And actually how they do it is they have to be, so they meet a minimum standard, but then they get an insurance from an insurance company to say that they met that standard. So there is an economic side to this equation as well to make this tick and operate in the country. I think we have to reflect differently of what are the minimum acceptable standards to, because we all in the same thing, whether it's Heather and Tushar, you mentioned it, I think we got a lot of critical infrastructures and a lot of dependencies are being created with the Internet of Things, the smart cities, connected vehicles, and a whole range of connectivity that we'll be creating in the future. We have to figure a way of making sure that each component of this, from a business cycle or organization or something, is meeting a minimum standard that helps that whole building the whole infrastructure that is reasonably safe in Canada.
Thanks, Namir. So I was going to say, as a net consumer of these services, and that I do need talented people working for me. I need, as my beard gets longer and grayer, I'm looking at who's the next person who's going to step into the senior role at the university. First question is, are we actually able to fill that gap? Heather mentioned 100,000, regardless whether it's 40,000 or 100,000. We need a lot of talent developed over the next very short time. We haven't really prepared the groundwork to a large extent. Can we do it? Can we actually get that number of trained individuals who have that breadth of skill set to take on these roles? And there are numerous of them now, everything from the ethical hacker to the governance, risk, and compliance guru. How are we going to do it? And will virtualized training actually work? Is it an effective path forward?
Go ahead, Heather.
Yeah, I think we can. I think it's a, you know, it's we have to think differently about how we're doing the training and expand it. We have to look at collaboration a lot more in terms of post-secondary institutes working together with private sector. We have to look at, in some cases, there's going to be, you have to move faster with job ready training. And so boot camps, you're going to have to look at it a lot different. It's not just a standard 2, 4, 6-year program. I think they're still important, but if we're going to reduce that gap, we have to do things differently, and a lot more collaboration and micro degrees and badging. Those are all things that are becoming increasingly important to employers. And I think we have to look at inclusion in a different way. We have to look at First Nations. We have to look at women. How do we attract and keep people in the professions? So there's changes that we have to make. And sometimes you have to just think about, when you're doing recruitment, the language that you're using. When you're recruiting women, for example, we respond to different words than what men do. So it's rethinking how things are happening. And yes, so I do think we can do it, but we have to think differently.
Yeah, totally agree with Heather. I think leveraging all human capital in Canada is going to be a critical aspect going forward. All our talent is an important dimension of this. But I think there are three specific areas of themes that I think. One is developing the talent early in schooling, as Tushar and Heather mentioned. How do we start with that from early schooling, high school or others, right to post-secondary education, the whole continuum? The second is the upskilling and reskilling to meet that demand as well, because we have to continually do this. And the third component is the global talent stream. There are situations that we have to go potentially and seek some of that talent that is developed internationally, and attract some of the internationally educated professionals in that space. The reality is that we're all competing in a global, very tight labor market globally. Whether we're looking at it, the UK is looking at it, Europe, the United States, is looking at the same dimension. Hence, we have to think of what are the multitude of streams that we have to develop to make that happen for us.
All right, and I guess I'll add a little bit of my thoughts. I'm very concerned about numbers that are put out there, because it's actually easy to hit numbers, but it's very difficult to hit those numbers with quality. And this typically happens in a lot of environments, is that they'll say, oh, we need to produce this number. Let's go and produce that number. But how do you know they are actually meeting that level or standard effectively for a long term? And so this is where the reskilling component Namir spoke about comes into play, is you need to be continually pushing out. And badging, as Heather mentioned, is a big part of that, because you can have micro-credentials continually going out. But I'm very concerned that if you're asking for 100,000 people who can address this, we might end up with 100,000 people or 90,000 of them that are from a theoretical perspective or in a controlled environment perspective have met the standard without enough practical or without enough natural curiosity to delve into the subject matter and explore it, which is why I tend to lean towards trying to focus on those students in high school and higher education, because they tend to have more time, free time available to actually delve into these interest areas and then cultivate the talent from there. We do have a large population that is no longer in higher education, that's in continual education, that is interested in these areas as well. But hitting 100,000, I think, is going to be tough when you need 100,000 that can critically attack the problem. And so perhaps we need to look at it from a broader perspective and attract outside of just the IT sector. We need to attract those who are coming in from psychology, from marketing, from economics, from other fields, who have the critical thinking skills and the problem solving skills that are required, and perhaps to pair them with those that we have trained technically in the field. And that does add cost and expense, but it does lead to some unique opportunities for service-based companies there to offer unique products in market as well. And so I guess to kind of sum it up, I'm concerned about hitting that number, I don't think 100,000 is also a sufficient number. I think it needs to be much, much larger, considering what we need to do. And Heather, I think you're agreeing very much there as well. Like we, with COVID, everything and everyone virtualizing, that number probably went to 250,000 easy.
Yep.
Because now you need to secure everyone's home environment as well. You need to help them understand the additional intrusions there in a non-controlled environment.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I think you're absolutely right. I also agree about looking into non-traditional areas to be able to pull people who have the propensity to be the critical thinkers and to work in that space. And I think that we can make use of psychometrics as well to be able to test people for the propensity if they have that skill set and ability to expand into the area of cybersecurity. So it's like I said, it's not an easy task. I think that we have to think very differently about how we're approaching it and use and leverage things like psychometrics where we can, test the ability for people if they have the propensity. And if they have the propensity, they're more likely to feel comfortable and successful and therefore do better in the role. So I think we have a lot to do. And I think working together is going to be very important for making this happen.
Tushar, you mentioned quality, and I really would like to just dig in a little bit more on that one, because one of my concerns is we bring people in, they don't have the experiential and hands-on learning that they need to work in an IT role. And most of our security people end up in IT. How do we get that, and how important is that hands-on experiential learning that those years of experiences those of us who have lived in IT have gained? How important is that to that training component?
I'll kind of respond with a little bit of an example. When you're operating under mostly normal circumstances, you can't really tell the difference between someone who is exceptional in that area and someone who is average. But when I guess I can't swear on this, when things hit the fan, you end up creating separation. You understand why you might be paying more for that person and also why that experience there matters. Because we can throw money at the problem, and we do tend to throw money at the problem, and buying additional hardware, configuring firewalls and things like that, doing additional training. But when something goes wrong, your DR plan is tested. Your actual data security practices are tested. Your documentation and your intrusion detection systems, everything is tested. And you really need people who understand that collectively, but understand it at a fundamental level of this is how the network actually works, or this is how people actually work. This is how they actually use their devices and tools. That can be built, but it can't be people just sitting in their roles saying, I'm just going to do day in, day out. You need to have your security people understanding how the organization functions holistically, and then go through a series of exercises and training, essentially simulating that. Armed forces around the world do that constantly. They run war games for a reason. We very rarely run war games within a digital environment with the latest and greatest. We very rarely pit teams within companies against each other. We are doing that. That's some of the program development we do is competition. And we try and get some people to come in and hack. You might get pen testing done for your organization, but it's not your organization doing that. And you really need to get people internally trying to hack the network to build that experience, or to try and fish your own team to build that experience to find gaps. And I think that will help build resilience within your company with the teams that you have and give practical experience, because at the same time, no two companies are alike.
And I would say that, good certifications that have good practical hands-on cyber ranges, and that you're able to go in and do that real practical attack mode is absolutely imperative to ensuring resilience, for sure.
All right. Well, not surprisingly, we have flown through our time, and we're getting on to our last question. What I'd like to ask is, now that we are effectively working virtually, what issues should CISOs include in their strategies for 2021? Looking forward, what advice can you give to people like me who have to live the virtual life?
I can jump in there. I think that one of the things that CISOs have to think about going forward in 2021, it's going to be around more about policy change with people working from home. What does that mean for privacy and access to information? I'm working from home, obviously, and what access do I have to information? Who's coming in? Do I leave my computer open? We have to think about all these things and breaches. I think that, so it's policies for privacy, codes of ethics. I think those are things that CISOs have to start thinking about because it's a much different world.
Any other comments on that? I'm always looking for advice.
I think I'll add one thing of how do you balance as a CISO the privacy that people want to have at home and not have the intrusion of work into what is essentially now a workplace hybrid, and essentially maintain that data security that you need to do and be comfortable. Like, how can a CISO sleep at night while also not having a rebellion from their actual people at the company that they're required to ensure are following secure practices? So as Heather mentioned, your policies are going to change rapidly, but you're going to get a lot of pushback. And what sort of automation can you deploy and that will actually sit on your network or the connectivity in between so that you can ensure that the people you have will be happy and aren't feeling like you're watching them and their devices all of the time? Because that's what we've seen in the last few months, is just this, okay, everyone's getting device managers, everyone's going to lock down their devices, we can wipe everything remotely. A lot of people don't want that. I would say most people don't want that, especially in their personal environments. So you have to figure out some mechanism with new vendors potentially or existing ones that are offering solutions that will allow that to happen. And just sending out policy or updates or emails is not going to cause people to be more secure because they're already in a stressed environment. You have an unknown space that you're now charting. People will just ignore security practices because they can't deal with it anymore. They don't want to deal with it anymore. It's just too much. That's different from a physical space that they were sharing. So you have to now bring on people who can actually understand the mindset and deploy softer security, better security, more humane security practices as well. I think that's what you have to figure out.
I think that's absolutely true. And Heather hit on the important topic of governance. And really, what people don't want is you intruding into their private life. They don't want to feel that overwhelming surveillance happening. And good governance is one of the controls that you can put in place to ensure that doesn't happen. I think we've done it okay at TRU. We have to have VP permission to actually look at someone's personal information, which is a really good control, right? So we move it right to the top. We don't make random decisions about poking into people's private life. And we automate a lot of the processes that need to take place. We need to collect logs. We need to know what happened, but we don't have to be watching over your shoulder while you're typing an email. With that, we've actually come to the 40 minutes after the hour. And I wanted to open up the panel to questions, and we have a couple already. The first one is, how important are cyber ranges for virtual hands-on training? Who would like to take that one on?
I think all three of us probably have something to say. Heather, why don't you go first?
Okay. I think, as I said earlier, I think that cyber ranges are very important for that practical hands-on training. It gives people the ability to do the attack mode and blue team, red team. I think they're critical, and I think they're becoming more critical in terms of virtual training. And also, I know for our cyber range, we can also benchmark people's abilities and then design training around that benchmarking to help them improve where their deficiencies are. So yeah, I think that it's absolutely imperative.
And could you just give us a quick introduction to cyber ranges and what they are?
Well, so they kind of vary in different capacities. Cyber ranges enable people to do the practical learning and to do to simulate attack modes and blue teaming and red teaming. And ours, as I said, it also enables us to benchmark people's capabilities and then design training programs specific to that. So and you can build all kinds of training sessions around it as well.
Great, thanks, Heather. We have another question. Are you partnering with enterprise service providers to offer new certifications is the first part. Pricing and accessibility cannot be ignored. With virtualization, are you seeing a drop or shift in prices for training? Who would like to take that one on?
I can address, yeah, I can address some of that. So we've always engaged in the virtualizing of training early on, more from for organizations that were offering training as well. So universities, colleges, and professional learning, because they looked at the online environment as more cost effective, the ability to reach people. And so there was already a general shift towards virtualizing training, I would say, more driven from a profit point of view. And there has been a rapid acceleration. There's more of an emphasis going forward as well in many places. They've not really dropped their prices in offering these services. And part of that is they're seeing a demand and they're able to capitalize on it as they should at the current time. So many times employers will step up and then cover the costs for it because they understand the importance of it. Now, in terms of, are we partnering with folks? I can say that we are working with some very large companies in order to provide training at their end, and fintech especially. They've seen a really big move during this time frame, but many fintech companies have moved away from needing people to more needing people who understand the automation components behind it. And so there's been a real shift also in enterprise in the type of cyber training that they're doing, that they don't need necessarily as many people on site that will implement, more people who will recognize and build policy as well around it and are more critically thinking about the problems coming in from an organizational perspective and have technical background. So there's been a lot of shifts on that side. Now on the small and medium business side, there's been a massive growth in just we need security professionals and we need to just go through the ABCs of securing and train everyone up. And they've got multi-year programs in place that they want to engage in on that side. So it's a complex space because you have some that are on the bleeding edge and are really looking at how are we going to engage going forward, and others that are playing, I'd say 90% are playing catch up as well right now.
Any other comments on that question?
From our perspective as a certification body, there's a significant amount of work that goes into maintaining certifications to a certain standard, as well as developing new ones. Significant amount of labor and bringing expertise, and also in the platform development and working with subject matter experts around the world. So we work to keep our prices as cost effective as possible, considering that there's a significant amount of work that goes in behind the scenes to create the certification and to maintain it to the level and standards that our members expect.
What about those technology partners? Are you partnering with them? The Cisco's and Fortinets and...
For us, we're vendor neutral, so our certifications can be applied across the board.
All right. We have one more question that's come in. And this one, I think I will direct to Heather, because it's how do you manage for plagiarism and cheating in your online class?
For me, for my personal teaching, I've designed my course this year so plagiarism won't be so much of an issue. Cheating could be an issue. Since I've been teaching, I've only had to deal with plagiarism twice, and last year was my most serious one. It's an issue. It's an issue this year or any time in terms of cheating. And now we have a situation where everything's online. So you try to build in systems and checks and remind people of their ethics and their code of standards that they're supposed to follow at the university, and hope for the best.
Yes, we do have a very robust academic integrity task force working at Thompson Rivers, and it is a big problem, and it's getting more and more difficult to identify cheating as students become a little better at understanding what we're looking at. But it's certainly an area where automation could play an important role.
Sure.
Well, let me address that really quickly, because Minute School has our student-facing side product, and we are working on a writing product right now as well. That's going to be a losing battle if your exercises remain the same. And most of the time, if you have the same sort of exercise that has the same outline and same requirements, students year to year will talk, and it'll get easier and easier. I mean, you can pay people online $20 to write a paper for you, and that's written by a real person, and you can get around to work from doing it. So it comes down back to the way I started this whole conversation, is program design. And it's expensive, it's difficult, but you fundamentally have to change how you do exercises and group work from the way that it has been for 100 years, and come up with new methods to actually assess people and their capabilities, which is why things like cyber ranges are really interesting. But so are things that are practical online labs. Those are also very important in terms of assessing what you need to do. And then not just asking someone of, give me your paper and let me mark it. And I understand this is expensive, but actually having a discussion with them about their paper and asking them to explain it, so that almost everything becomes a little thesis presentation. But those sort of systems can be very effective in dissuading people to cheat and making sure that you're actually assessing that they understood what they wrote, which is a big piece of what in many different programs.
What about proctoring virtual exams? How do we achieve that?
All right, I'm from Waterloo. We've worked out lots of different ways amongst the communities here on how you can manipulate media. In fact, everyone knows what deepfakes are. If you don't, on YouTube, you can find a new comedy series called Sassy Justice by the South Park creators. And it is incredibly well done. That technology is becoming easy enough to run from a smartphone. And this is, I mean, you're always going to be falling behind. You have to find different ways of testing people rather than just sitting there and watching them. Right? Like, you actually have to get them to create. If you look at the Bloom's taxonomy, you have to start pushing towards the top. You can't just be sitting here on this simple, easy stuff at the bottom that's easy to mark. There's a cost to actually assessing people. And with industrialized education, we have to recognize that we need to come up with different ways to do that provide value to the student as well, so they understand that they're just not writing a paper and they're done, that the paper is the effort that they're putting in.
Thanks, Tushar. Well, surprisingly, we are at the end of our 50 minutes, and I do want to give people back the 10 minutes to the top of the hour to get away from their screens and do something besides be involved in a virtual environment, because we know our attention span is really not that long. So with that, I'd like to thank you for participating. Namir, Heather, and Tushar, it's been great. I certainly learned a lot, and I appreciate you taking the time to join us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.